missionaries came with their gospels and Before the missionaries came with their gospels and the conquerors with their flags, Africa was already a land of gods. Not one god, not two, but hundreds, each rooted in earth and sky, in mountain and river, in wind and flame. They were not silent statues or distant abstractions. They were alive. They breathed through thunderstorms and danced in the firelight of ancestral shrines. They were known by names that echoed across valleys and kingdoms, divine figures who shaped the lives, destinies, and spiritual worlds of millions. And yet today, many of these gods are forgotten, buried beneath the weight of colonization, erased from books, mocked by foreign theologies, or simply left untold. We are taught that Africa was a spiritual blank slate, waiting to be saved, enlightened, filled with true religion. But this is a lie. Long before Islam and Christianity ever touched the continent, African civilizations had rich and complex spiritual systems, many of which rivaled or even predated those of Greece, Rome, and the so-called cradles of civilization. From the deep forests of West Africa to the deserts of the Nile, from the lakes of the Great Rift to the highlands of Ethiopia, the gods of Africa reigned. They brought rain. They struck with lightning. They healed with herbs and spoke through dreams. They governed birth and death, justice and war, madness and love. These deities were not simply worshipped, they were part of the community. They walked with their people, guided their leaders, punished the corrupt, and protected the innocent. Their temples were not built to impress, but to connect. Their myths were not just stories, but truths, carried in drumbeats and firelight passed down through elders and rituals. Every river had a spirit, every mountain had a name, and every ancestor could speak through a whisper or a wind. But over time, these gods were demonized, diminished, or domesticated. They were labeled pagan or primitive, severed from their people by sword, cross, and creed. This video is a journey to reclaim them, to remember who they were and what they meant. To understand African spirituality before colonization is not just to study the past. It is to rediscover the soul of a continent, the divine memory of a people, and the gods who never truly left. In West Africa, the air has always been thick with spirit. Every breeze might carry a message. Every tree might house a guardian. Every drumbeat might call forth the divine. This region, with its vast cultural and linguistic diversity, is one of the richest spiritual landscapes on Earth, home to a pantheon of deities who do not reside in distant heavens, but who live among their people. Here, divinity is not hidden. It's alive in the Orisha, in Vodun spirits, in the Abosom, in ancestral echoes that stretch across time. Among the Yoruba people of present-day Nigeria, Benin, and Togo, the gods are known as the Orisha, divine forces that govern the cosmos and interact directly with human beings. They are not merely symbolic, they are real, with personalities, likes, dislikes, and domains of influence. At the center of Yoruba cosmology stands Olodumare, the supreme being, the source of all life and energy. Olodumare is distant, not worshipped directly, but understood as the divine architect of existence. It is the Orisha who serve as intermediaries between humanity and the source. There are hundreds of Orisha, but some are known across the world for their power and character. Shango, the god of thunder and lightning, represents raw power and justice. He rules with fire and passion, often seen wielding a double-headed axe. Oshun, goddess of rivers, beauty, love, and fertility, is gentle but not weak, a goddess whose waters can soothe or destroy. Ogun, the god of iron and war, is the divine blacksmith, patron of technology and strength. Obatala, calm and wise, shapes human bodies from clay. Each Orisha is associated with natural forces, colors, foods, songs, and dances. Their worship is vibrant, embodied, and intensely relational, maintained through offerings, festivals, possession ceremonies, and music. To the west of Yoruba lands, in what is now Benin, the Fon people developed a closely related but distinct spiritual tradition, Vodun. Often misunderstood and misrepresented in the West, Vodun is a highly organized system of deities and spiritual forces rooted in the natural world. The spirits of Vodun, like the Orisha, inhabit water, earth, fire, and air. The most revered among them include Mawu Lisa, the twin deity representing the balance of male and female, moon and sun. Mawu is gentle, motherly, and tied to the night, while Lisa is powerful, solar, and associated with the day. Together they birthed the universe. Vodun includes Legba, the trickster and gatekeeper, who opens pathways between the spirit world and the living. Before any ritual, Legba must be invoked, for without him, no communication with the divine is possible. Then there is Sakpata, god of the earth and disease, who must be appeased to ensure health and fertility, and Hevioso, god of thunder and retribution. These deities are not abstract archetypes, they are living presences. Temples in Vodun communities are not mere buildings, but sacred spaces where the gods live, rest, and speak. Further along the coast and into the interior, we enter the domain of the Akan peoples, particularly in present-day Ghana and Ivory Coast. Their spiritual system revolves around Abosom, the lesser deities who serve under Nyam, the supreme sky god. Nyam is all-encompassing, omniscient, and the source of all spiritual power, but he is not directly involved in daily life. It is through the Abosom, deities of rivers, forests, fertility, and justice. Abosom, deities of rivers, forests, fertility, and justice, that humans find guidance, protection, and healing. Prominent among them is Tano, god of war and river justice, and Asase Ya, the goddess of the earth, associated with agriculture and the grave. Among the Mande peoples, including the Mandinka, Bambara, and Malinki, the concept of divinity takes a more fluid and mystical shape. Rather than a structured pantheon, the Mande spiritual worldview centers on Nyama, a spiritual force or energy that permeates all existence. Nyama is not a deity, but a universal power that can be manipulated through speech, music, ritual, and moral behavior. To misuse Nyama is to court imbalance, misfortune, or even madness. The Mande believe deeply in the jinn and ancestral spirits who dwell alongside the living and influence the visible world. Ritual specialists like marabouts or jaliubo griots serve as bridges between the seen and unseen, balancing the flow of Nyama to ensure community well-being. And within this vast spiritual web of West Africa, we must not forget the divine forces of the Igbo people. The traditional religion of the Igbo, known as Odinani, recognizes a supreme creator deity named Chukwu, the source of all things, all spirits, all life. Chukwu is vast and transcendent, beyond comprehension, but intimately connected to creation. Everything that exists, from humans to rain to death, flows from Chukwu's essence. But perhaps the most beloved and invoked deity in Igbo spirituality is Allah, the earth goddess. She is the moral compass, guardian of the land. Fertility and law, Allah is the mother of all and the keeper of the dead, who reside in her womb when they pass. To violate the earth, to commit murder, or to break taboo is to offend Allah, and her wrath can manifest through misfortune or drought. Every year, the New Yam Festival is held in her honor, reaffirming the people's bond with the land and its spirit. Across West Africa, despite linguistic and cultural differences, we see a common theme. a spirituality deeply embedded in nature, community, and moral balance. The gods are not merely objects of devotion, they are active participants in daily life. They punish greed, reward honesty, and guide the soul. Through dreams, visions, and ritual, they are mothers and fathers, warriors and lovers, protectors and avengers. Their ceremonies are not static traditions. They are living performances filled with music, dance, possession, and fire. And even today, though colonization and conversion sought to silence them, the gods of West Africa still speak in songs, in stories, in shrines hidden deep within forest groves, in the golden sands along the Nile, beneath the shadows of towering temples and monumental tombs. The ancient gods of North and East Africa once reigned with power and poetry. Long before pyramids were tourist destinations and hieroglyphs were museum exhibits, the people of Kemet, what we now call Egypt, worshipped a pantheon that reflected the cosmic order, human emotion, and the eternal dance between life and death. Their gods were not frozen in myth. They were the architects of civilization, guiding everything from childbirth to the setting of the sun. At the heart of Kemetian belief was Ma'at, not a god in the conventional sense, but the living principle of truth, balance, harmony, and justice. Ma'at was the glue of the universe, and every deity, every pharaoh, and every mortal was expected to uphold it. When people died, their hearts were weighed against her feather. To live in Ma'at was to live in divine alignment, not only with law, but with the cosmos itself. Around this central concept swirled a pantheon, both vast and intimate. Ra, the sun god, rose each morning on his solar boat, sailing across the sky before plunging into the underworld at dusk, where he would do battle with Apep, the serpent of chaos. Victory was never assumed, only earned night after night by the force of divine will. Osiris, the green-skinned god of the afterlife, once ruled the earth before being murdered by his jealous brother Set. His wife and sister Isis resurrected him through magical rites, and together they produced Horus, the falcon-headed avenger who reclaimed his father's throne. These gods formed a divine narrative that mirrored the cycles of the Nile, the seasons, and human rebirth. Temples to these deities were more than architectural wonders. They were cosmic machines designed to connect the earthly with the divine. Every carving, every chant, every ritual was timed with astronomical precision, echoing the heavens above. South of Kemet, in what is now Sudan, the kingdom of Kush flourished with its own divine landscape, one that both borrowed from and reshaped Egyptian theology. The Kushites, especially during the height of the Napatan and Meroitic periods, venerated many of the same gods as their northern neighbors, but gave special prominence to figures like Amun, who merged with local beliefs to become a supreme creative force. The temple of Jebel Barkal became a major religious center, where Kushite kings were crowned as sons of Amun, linking political rule directly with spiritual power. But Kushite spirituality also produced unique deities. Apetamok, the lion-headed warrior god, represented strength, protection, and military prowess. Unlike the more cerebral gods of Kemet, Apetamok was fierce and immediate, a guardian of kings and bringer of vengeance. The goddess Amasemi, protector of women and the moon, was another distinct figure in Meroitic belief. Unlike in many patriarchal systems, Kushite queens, known as Kandakis, wielded both political and spiritual authority, suggesting a divine framework where feminine power was integral, not auxiliary. As we move east into the Horn of Africa, the ancient kingdom of Aksum emerges, a powerhouse of trade, culture, and early spirituality, located in what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea. Long before Christianity became the state religion in the 4th century CE, the people of Axum practiced a form of indigenous polytheism deeply tied to nature, stars, and kingship. Inscriptions from pre-Christian Axum reference gods such as Beher, associated with the sea, Marem, a war deity linked to royal power, and Ashtar, possibly a local form of the ancient Semitic goddess Astarte or Ishtar.
About to go slow sample on the chili. That's what we do in South America. Let's go. Keep going, keep going.
A local form of the ancient Semitic goddess Astarte or Ishtar. Marem, in particular, was considered the protector of the king and the kingdom, a divine sponsor of political legitimacy and military might. In the Horn, religion was not separated from nature. Sacred groves, mountains, and rivers were seen as dwellings of the divine. The people looked to the sky not just for weather, but for divine messages. Zar spirits, a class of ancestral or nature spirits, were believed to influence health and fate. These spirits could be benevolent or malevolent, and rituals were performed to appease them, often involving music, drumming, and dance. Such practices, particularly among Ethiopian and Somali communities, reflect a belief system where human behavior is constantly in dialogue with invisible forces. Among the Somali people, pre-Islamic spirituality was similarly rich, though much of it survives only in fragments. Oral traditions and poetic texts hint at a belief in Waq, a sky god who governed the heavens and rain. The worship of Waq was likely widespread in the Cushitic regions of the Horn, long before monotheistic traditions arrived. Associated with divine justice, fertility, and protection, Waq was not worshipped through temples but through nature itself, mountaintops, trees, and sacred wells. The presence of this god in Somali tradition links back to a broader ancient East African belief in a supreme sky deity, a kind of Pan-African spiritual archetype. It is important to note that East African spirituality was not static, like the land itself, shifting between dry plains and lush highlands. The divine in this region was fluid, responsive, and relational. Spirits might enter the body, dreams might reveal prophecies, and elders served as interpreters of the sacred world. In Ethiopia, this legacy would later blend with Christianity in ways that preserved many indigenous elements just beneath the surface of formal doctrine. Holy springs, saints' tombs, and nature-based festivals continued to carry the essence of ancient divine reverence. Together, the gods of Kemet, Kush, Axum, and the Horn tell a story of African spirituality that was majestic, mathematical, and profoundly mystical. These weren't gods to be believed in blindly. They were gods to be known, studied, spoken to, challenged, and honored. Their presence was felt in the flood of the Nile, the howl of desert winds, and the deep stillness of mountain caves. They ruled not only through myth, but through memory, through stone, sun, and silence. And though many of their names have been lost or distorted, their influence endures, in temples still standing, in rituals still practiced, and in a cosmic worldview that saw no separation between God, nature, and the human spirit. If the gods of North and East Africa ruled from temples of stone and mythic narratives of kings and rebirth, then the spiritual world of Central and Southern Africa emerged from breath, drum, and ancestral dust. Here the divine was not distant or untouchable. It was close, embedded in family lineages, the whisper of firewood crackling at night, and the pulse of rain on dry earth. In this vast region, stretching from the Congo Basin down to the southern plains, spirituality was not a religion practiced in fixed rituals. It was a lived philosophy, an eternal relationship between the living, the dead, and the unseen energies that govern the world. Among the Zulu people of southern Africa, the supreme deity is known as Unkulunkulu, the greatest of the great, who emerged from the primordial reeds and created the first man and woman. Yet Unkulunkulu, while acknowledged as the ultimate source of life, is not always the central figure in daily worship. For the Zulu, it is the Amadlozi, or ancestral spirits, who carry the weight of spiritual relevance. These ancestors are not gone. They are simply invisible, residing in another realm, but always watching, guiding, and intervening in the lives of their descendants. When things go wrong, illness, misfortune, or conflict, it is often believed that the ancestors are displeased, demanding attention, remembrance, or rectification. Offerings of beer, meat, or sacred herbs are made not out of fear, but out of respect for the living memory that binds the community across generations. Further north in what is now South Sudan, the Dinka people recognize a supreme god named Nyalik, a sky deity who is both creator and ruler of all existence. Nyalik created humans, cattle, and the world itself, and he governs with a mixture of distance and intimacy. He is approached through prayer and divination, but more often spiritual life among the Dinka revolves around cattle, sacred beings that are not only economic necessities but also spiritual connectors. The Dinka see cattle as gifts from Nyalik, and they are central to rituals, poetry, and even identity. Each cow has a name, a song, and a place in the social fabric. Through the care of these animals, the Dinka maintain their bond with the divine and express their gratitude for life itself. In the Congo Kingdom of Central Africa, spiritual life centered on the concept of Nzambi Mpungu, the creator god who fashioned the universe and then receded, allowing the world to unfold through a balance of spiritual forces. Unlike Western depictions of God as singular and omnipresent, Nzambi Mpungu is accompanied by Simbi, lesser spirits associated with nature, water, and ancestral power. The Congo cosmology was visualized through the Dikanga, a sacred cross symbolizing the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Each quadrant of the Dikanga represents a stage of life, the journey of the soul, and the transition between physical and spiritual realms. In this circular understanding of time, death is not an end, but a movement to another phase of existence, one where ancestors become guardians and teachers of the living. To the west of the Congo Basin, the Lozi people of what is now Zambia and Angola hold beliefs anchored in the creator god Nyambe, who made the earth, the sun, the animals, and the first humans. Nyambe once lived among people but grew weary of their violence and disobedience, retreating to the heavens to avoid their destruction. From there, he watches and listens, but rarely interferes. This belief echoes throughout African cosmologies. The divine withdraws not out of indifference, but to allow humans agency. Nyambe is revered, but it is through intermediaries such as the spirits of departed kings and clan ancestors that most spiritual guidance is sought. The Lozi's Great Kwamboka Festival, which involves the royal barge crossing the Zambezi River, is both a political event and a spiritual reenactment, a symbolic migration that honors tradition, rhythm, and divine authority. In the San traditions of southern Africa,
new town, new place. Is that basketball?
In the San traditions of southern Africa, among the oldest continuous spiritual systems in human history, the divine is not an external being, but a force present in every part of the environment. The San, or Bushmen, have lived for tens of thousands of years as hunter-gatherers across the Kalahari Desert, and their spirituality reflects that intimacy with the land. They speak of Shu, pronounced Ku, a high God who created the world and gave it its patterns. But perhaps more importantly, they practiced trance-healing dances, ecstatic communal rituals where healers enter altered states to cure illness, communicate with spirits, and harmonize the group's energy. These dances are not performances. They are sacred work, a way to touch the invisible, to restore balance, and to release tension back into the spirit world. Across the Bantu-speaking peoples who make up a vast and diverse population stretching from Cameroon to South Africa, similar themes emerge. Most believe in a supreme being, often referred to as Mulungu, Nyame, or Lisa, depending on the region. This god is typically understood as remote, a creator who initiated life but entrusted its maintenance to spirits, nature, and ancestors. Ritual specialists such as Ngangas or Sangomas serve as intermediaries diagnosing spiritual disturbances and offering remedies through herbs, charms, or spirit possession. Divination methods, from throwing bones to interpreting dreams, are common tools for navigating the unseen. Illness, infertility, or misfortune is not viewed as random, but as a signal from the spiritual world, demanding attention and response. Despite regional variations, one thread binds all these traditions: the centrality of ancestors and the continuity of life after death. Ancestors are not merely remembered. They are active participants in family politics and fate. They protect, punish, advise, and even dream through their descendants. In many Central and Southern African cultures, to disrespect the dead is to invite disaster, while to honor them is to ensure prosperity, healing, and spiritual harmony. These belief systems did not require scripture or centralized temples. They were lived through ritual, song, sacrifice, and oral transmission. They adapted to change, absorbed local variations, and responded to the rhythms of the land. They emphasized balance between the visible and invisible, the living and the dead, the human and the animal, and they taught a profound truth: that the world is full of presence, and that nothing, not stone, not river, not silence, is empty of spirit. That the world is full of presence, and that nothing, not stone, not river, not silence, is empty of spirit. As colonization and conversion spread, many of these traditions were repressed or recast as superstition. But they did not vanish. They went underground, folded into Christian symbolism, or carried across oceans in the memories of the enslaved. Today, across Central and Southern Africa, these traditions are being reclaimed, remembered, and reawakened, not only as heritage, but as truth. When European missionaries arrived on African soil, they did not come merely with Bibles and rosaries. They came with an agenda, one that saw African spiritual systems not as sacred, but as savage, not as faith, but as fear. In the eyes of colonial rulers and Christian evangelists, the gods of Africa were obstacles to civilization, dangerous relics of a people who needed saving. Conversion was not just a matter of theology, it was policy, warfare, cultural conquest, and in the process, entire worlds of meaning were dismantled. The gods who once ruled rivers and guided kings were now labeled demons. Ancestors became evil spirits. Sacred drums were silenced. Shrines were burned. The old ways, thousands of years in the making, were mocked as backward and erased from schools, law, and history. Yet, African spirituality did not die. It adapted. It survived. Often it transformed under pressure, folding into new forms that masked the old gods in new names. This process, known as syncretism, became a powerful weapon of spiritual resistance, a way for enslaved and colonized Africans to preserve their gods beneath the surface of colonial religion. in the Caribbean and the Americas, where millions of Africans were forcibly taken during the transatlantic slave trade, the gods traveled with them, not in temples, but in memory, song, rhythm, and ritual. In Haiti, the spirit systems of West Africa merged with French Catholicism to create Vodou. The Orisha became the LWA, divine spirits who ride their devotees during trance. A Catholic saint might represent a traditional god. Erzeli mirrored Oshun. Baron Samedi echoed ancestral death spirits. Catholic altars became coded maps to divine pantheons that had survived the Middle Passage. Rituals of possession, drumming, offering, and invocation continued, even under the eyes of plantation owners and priests. In Vodou ceremonies, the old world was reborn, with the same gods now hidden in plain sight. In Brazil, enslaved Africans created candomblé, a vibrant spiritual system rooted in Yoruba cosmology but shaped by the rhythms of the Atlantic world. The Orisha were honored with ritual dance, sacred drumming, and richly adorned altars. Each Orisha was associated not only with natural forces, but with colors, foods, and Catholic saints. To outsiders, it looked like Catholicism. To insiders, it was an unbroken continuation of African divinity. In Cuba, similar dynamics gave rise to Santeria, where the Orisha were again renamed but never forgotten. Shango became Saint Barbara, Elegua was masked as Saint Anthony. These were not conversions, they were survivals. Back in Africa, colonial pressure also transformed traditional religion. Missionary schools refused to teach African spiritual beliefs, often punishing children who practiced ancestral rituals. Governments banned public ceremonies, criminalized possession rituals, and destroyed sacred groves. The gods were not only marginalized, they were criminalized. And yet, the gods still found ways to speak. In hidden shrines, in midnight songs, in whispered prayers to the river, they remained. African people continued to consult diviners, honor ancestors, and make offerings, even as churches rose above villages and European names replaced African ones. Some responded with blending, creating African independent churches that fused Christian symbols with indigenous practices. In places like Nigeria, prophets began speaking of visions not unlike those of ancient diviners. Healing, spirit possession, and ritual music all returned in new forms. Churches like the Aladura movement retained deep connections to spiritual heritage while navigating a Christian framework. In South Africa, Zionist churches incorporated sacred water rituals, trance healing, and prophetic dreams, all central elements of African cosmology dressed in Christian robes. Even among those who fully converted, the old spiritual intuitions never completely faded. In times of crisis, many would still return to the elders, the spirits, the ways of their ancestors. A sickness that Western medicine could not cure might send someone back to the shrine. A troubled dream might call for the guidance of an oracle. Death was never final. The dead still walked, still watched, still required care. The relationship between the visible and invisible remained intact, even if hidden beneath layers of colonial shame. Today, we see a resurgence, a reawakening of African spiritual consciousness. Across the continent and the diaspora, people are returning to the gods of their ancestors. Young Africans are learning the names of Orisha, Abosom, Vodun spirits, and ancestral deities once forbidden. Scholars are translating ancient texts. Artists are reviving sacred symbols. Social media has become a platform for digital priests, spiritual educators, and cultural historians. People are reclaiming names, languages, and rites once deemed forbidden. This is not nostalgia, it is reclamation. It is spiritual survival, not in ruins or relics, but in renewal. Colonization sought to destroy African spirituality, but it only scattered it, and like seeds, these traditions grew in the cracks. The gods were never truly gone. They waited, in drums, in dreams, in rivers, for the moment to return. And now, with each name spoken, each ritual reborn, they rise again, not as shadows of the past, but as living forces in the present. Their survival is not just testimony to their power. It is testimony to the resilience of the African spirit. What does it mean to forget a god? To walk past a river and no longer bow your head? To see the stars and no longer know their names? To speak a language stripped of its prayers? To bury your dead without the rites that once opened the path to the ancestors? The colonization of Africa was not only a conquest of land and labor, it was a conquest of spirit. It replaced sacred mountains with mission schools, ancestral altars with pulpits, and gods that spoke in thunder, dream, and drum, with quiet, distant figures imported from far away. But the story does not end there. The gods of Africa were never truly gone. They were silenced, yes, but not erased. They retreated into memory, into story, into the private spaces of grandmothers' songs and hidden altars. They were carried across oceans in the minds of the enslaved. They took new names hid behind saints, whispered through rituals outlawed and ridiculed. And now they are returning, not with rage, but with remembrance. In the rediscovery of Chukwu and Allah, of Oshun and Shango, of Nialik and Nzambi, a spiritual renaissance is rising. It is not just the revival of old gods. It is the recovery of a world where spirit flows through everything, where ancestors walk beside the living, where the earth is not resource, but relative. To remember the gods of Africa is to remember that African civilizations were not spiritually empty before the arrival of Islam or Christianity. They were full of cosmologies, philosophies, rituals, ethics, and deep reverence for the mysteries of life. These were not fragmented tribal customs. They were complex, interconnected systems of belief that sustained kingdoms, guided agriculture, defined law, and answered the deepest questions of existence. Who are we? Why are we here? What happens when we die? The gods of Africa held these questions with grace and gravity, wrapped in stories that spanned generations. And today, as Africa confronts modernity, migration, and global identity, remembering the gods is an act of grounding. It is a refusal to let colonization be the final author of African spirituality. It is a declaration that the continent's soul was never lost, only obscured. The temples may be gone, but the rivers still flow. The drums still beat.
This is the Smart Garage.
The drums still beat. The dreams still come. And in those rhythms, the gods are waiting, not to be worshipped blindly, but to be known again, to be engaged with, questioned, honored, and heard. For some, remembering the gods means returning to ancestral rites, relearning ceremonies, and speaking to spirits in sacred groves. For others, it means reimagining the divine through African eyes, writing new poetry, creating new music, and building new altars that blend tradition with today. It doesn't require rejecting other faiths. It simply requires making space for the stories that were stolen, for the deities that once walked these lands before any foreign prophet set foot upon them. This is not just history, it is healing. Because to remember the gods is to remember the people. To know that African identity did not begin in chains or colonization, but in creation myths and cosmic dances, in the rhythm of rituals passed down under stars older than any empire. To remember is to restore balance, to remind the world and ourselves that Africa was and remains a continent of spirit, depth, and divine origin. So if this video moved you, if it stirred something ancient in your blood, if it reminded you of the wisdom whispered by your elders, if it made you want to light a candle for those who came before, then share it, like it, subscribe to this channel. Let's not only learn the history, let's live it, let's carry it. Let's make sure that these gods, these ancestors, these sacred truths are never forgotten again. Because the gods are not in the past. They are in the wind, the drum, the silence, and they are listening.